I'd like to share with you just a little bit of my personal testimony because it does relate so closely to my time in the military. And I want to read a few verses of Scripture found in Ephesians chapter 2. In Ephesians chapter 2. And most of you, I'm sure, can quote this by heart. In Ephesians chapter 2, verse 8. Ephesians chapter 2 and verse 8. For by grace are ye saved through faith, and that not of yourselves, it is the gift of God. And then verse 9, not of works, lest any man should boast. I graduated from high school in 1965, started a job with construction crew. Every time you go across this highway here to Bakersville, you can thank me that it's so straight. That was my job. I laid it out. I did a tremendous job, I thought, and every time I go across it, I kind of remind my wife, about that. But that job ended in the fall, and they asked me if I'd go with them to the next job, but I couldn't because something was happening in my life, and I was beginning to feel a restlessness, and I didn't know what it was, but I knew that I just couldn't be happy at anything that I was doing. I had 7 more jobs in the next year, and about that time, Vietnam was beginning to really heat up, and so in the early spring of 1966, I got my draft notice for the Army. Well, I didn't want to spend my spring and summer at boot camp, and so I had plans for the summer. I'd already made plans to party all summer long, and I didn't want to go to boot camp. And so I'd heard somewhere don't even remember where I'd heard it, but I'd heard that the Marine Corps had a delayed entry program where that you could enlist in the Marine Corps and not have to go for basic training for 90 days. And so I'd already gotten my draft notice. I had already passed my physical. They'd already told me that I had 30 days to get my life in order and that I would be reported in 30 days. So I went and talked to the Marine Corps recruiter, and he said, if you'll sign on the dotted line, you won't have to go until September. I said, let me sign. That was before I'd heard of a place called Parris Island, too. So I went to Parris Island and took basic, and something happened while I was at Parris Island that I didn't know at that time, but it was going to change my life. One night at mail call, my name was called out, and I went up there and I stood before the drill instructor, and we had to stand at attention, and we had to report to him, and then he'd hold out our letters, and we had to smack that thing and then do an about face and go back to our bunks, and then we could read our letter. Well, I went up there and I reported to the drill instructor, and he handed something to me, and I noticed from the corner of my eye that it was thicker than a letter. It looked like a small package, and that absolutely struck fear into my heart because we weren't allowed to receive packages. And I thought to myself, what's he going to do to me? Because I'd seen what he had done to other people that had received packages. And an interesting thing happened because as he handed me this small package, he treated it just like any other letter, and he didn't flinch, he didn't wink, he didn't do anything. He just handed me that package, and I smacked it. I did an about face, and I went back to my bunk. I didn't have any idea what it was. I got back to my bunk, and I opened that package, and much to my surprise, here was a Bible. My mother had sent me a Bible. I don't know why the drill instructor didn't ask me to inspect that package. I don't know why he didn't ask me what was in it. There was never a question made, never a reference made to that package. But I was thrilled just to have that Bible. And I wasn't living for the Lord, but I was still happy because it was from home. That night when lights were out, I took that little testament and I began to thumb through that testament, and I was wanting to read some from it, and I didn't know where to begin. and I kind of turned over toward the back, and I found all these little short chapters in this place called Psalms. I didn't know what Psalms were, but I knew they were short, and that I could read them during lights out from the light that was coming through the window over my bunk. And so beginning that night, I would read one psalm every night while I was in basic training. I went ahead and finished basic training, went to infantry training, then went to staging in Camp Pendleton, California, and then I got orders for Vietnam. In February 14th, I left for South Vietnam, and within a matter of days, I was in a firefight and in combat in Vietnam. And I'll tell you something about being in combat, and most of you men probably know this if you have been in combat, and there are no atheists in combat. There are no atheists in combat. And I remember my first firefight as we were pinned down behind the rice paddy dyke, and the bullets were flying, and you could hear the machine guns, and the helicopters were coming in and firing the rockets, and you didn't know what was going to happen. Two men were already down, and I didn't know what was going to take place, and we had walked into an ambush, and here it was, my first day with the company, and I thought to myself, it's going to be a long 13 months. But you know, I began to think something else. What if one of those bullets finds its mark? What if one of those bullets, and this is what I'm going to be facing for the next 13 months, and so what if one of those bullets finds its mark and I end up dead? And so I began to give myself a spiritual survey. And I began to try to discern where I was spiritually and what my relationship was with the Lord. I grew up in church, and I attended this church. And I was here for revival meetings, and I was here for Sunday school, and I was a member of this RA group, and my mom and dad brought me to this church. And so I began to think to myself, okay, I've made a profession of faith, and I've been baptized, and I'm a member of a church, and I read my Bible, Lord, because here it is. I still carried that little testament in the jacket of my pocket of my flak jacket. My flak jacket. I said, I read my Bible, and I pray, because I did. I prayed every night. Before, whether I was in the hole or on patrol, it didn't matter. I would pray. So I'm a member of a church. I've been baptized, and I made a profession of faith, and I read my Bible, and I pray, so I must be okay. So I got this sense of well-being. But as time progressed, I began to see that sense of well-being deteriorate. And I noticed that every time that there would be some type of combat action, that it would terrify me. The thoughts of death and the thoughts of being killed would terrify me. And it wasn't just the thoughts of dying. It was the thoughts of what happened afterward. And I thought, that's wrong. There's something wrong. I continued on in combat. I was supposed to rotate home on March 14th of 1968, and on January 2nd of 1968, during a ceasefire, I got wounded. My ankle was broken with a mine, and I was taken to 1st Medical Battalion. They put a cast on my leg, and I had no duty from that time until the time that I rotated home. They didn't send me home. I wish they had. But they didn't, and they kept me over there, and I was on no duty until I came home. Came home, and I was sent down to Camp Lejeune. I stayed there for a few weeks, and I went down to Cuba, stayed there for 3 months, and during this time, my drinking just escalated. I was an out-and-out drunk. I didn't drink socially. That didn't make any sense to me. I drank for the effect. And I was an out-and-out sot. That's all it was. I had gone beyond the stages of being a drunk. If we went to the club, I was usually so drunk that I couldn't hardly make it back. That's just the way I was.